Hello, and welcome to Café con Carmine, with me, Luke. In today's episode, I'm going to continue on the discussion of elections and, moreover, focus on proportional representation. Last time I spoke, I mentioned about some of the benefits and the drawbacks of the majoritarian systems, which have been, let's just say I'm just adding onto the pile of criticisms of majoritarian systems. I do point to the benefits, and some of which can be definitely seen as very effective. However, maybe they do not truly reflect the populace, and that's the big problem. There is the works of Maurice Duverger, who points to that SMD systems are really not willing to let people vote for small parties, and that is a big problem, because if you think of what the idea of an election is whatever the will of the people is, it is reflected in its governance. And that really steps into what we're talking about. We have different systems for proportional representation, and in essence their benefits and their drawbacks are all kind of similar. So unlike majoritarian ones, which maybe yield slightly different benefits and drawbacks, I do find that proportional representation tends to be quite consistent in its successes and failures, or at least more so than a majoritarian system. One of the ones that I tend to see that we really notice around the world is AMS, which is additional member systems. Additional member systems is a way of managing, if you will, like a hybrid of first past the post, which I mentioned about last time, and the other system, which is the proportional representation. So the way it works is usually it's a 50-50 split. You will vote for a single member constituent to represent your area, but you will also vote for a party member. And this is like a list system. This is a system used in Germany, Italy, Russia in particular, the Duma, New Zealand, and actually within the UK as well, but only for the Welsh Assembly and the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood. Now, this system has many benefits to it. The hybrid nature is something that probably might have even rung out to you as a very good thing to introduce, rather than trying to strive for a completely proportional representative system or a purely majoritarian system. Trying to strike the balance with both is a good idea, and actually much of Europe does use this system. Although it is a system of which you could say yields very wild results at times, it does usually provide single party governments. This is an important thing to consider, because if you do want to see representation in your government, you want it to be fair and balanced in terms of the overall parliament, but you do want a single party at the end of the day to be ruling. This as well does allow the electors to represent themselves in their voice by saying, I like maybe this individual to represent my area, but the politics, I am more for this. One of the issues I pointed to last time was that certain systems do have this problem. If you remember, I was talking about the idea of second ballot systems and AV supplementary voting. These don't always allow for individuals to be represented in other constituencies, or have to go to another constituency to really have their party voice heard. So, for example, if you're, like I said last time, supporter of the Greens, you might not have a Green Party candidate in your area, but this PR system would allow you to have that because you have the party list. However, and one thing that you have to really consider that is a true point about this system, the AMS system, is that it does take into account the fact that representing constituents and holding ministerial offices are very different to one another. And they maybe show that the system of which that you're looking for when it comes to your voting is different. So what you're saying is, I vote for this person because I want someone to represent my area. However, I do not want that person maybe to be holding a ministerial office. So the voices, we often say politicians are our voice, but what does that actually mean? We're not talking like a Plato era sort of representation, because we're not living in city-states. And your voice can be a multitude of things. We have different faces as people. However, and there is a big however with this, the AMS system does have a number of flaws with it. The system creates a double layer of representation. This can become a bit muddled for the person that's voting, the electorate. They are looking at this going, well, where does this job end and the other one begin? Most people are quite consistent with their voting. They will feel a certain way, they will vote that way both times. That's why often when there's been a massive landslide, it's probably because the person has voted twice in that ideal. And Germany is a good example of this. When Christian nationalists at the last election, they came second. There's strong right-wing rhetoric coming out of Germany. There's a reason for that, because what might be set up as a system doesn't really get reflected in reality. Furthermore, there are also issues with the representation of the size of the constituencies, because of the system, you're cutting it in half, the amount of constituencies, because it's only 50%. So you might be doubling the size of a constituency. So you might be covering more areas that maybe don't lean in your favour, and you might have a huge populace of votes that just go to waste. A big problem when you look at a system like this is that there is still a waste of votes. When this happens, under an AMS system in particular, what you will find is that parties as a whole congregate and maybe sort of become big sort of behemoths within their system. As I mentioned before, the Christian Democrats are a good example of a party who have wielded power pretty much for everything in the far right in Germany, because they are the umbrella. They become their own umbrellas in a lot of ways. When we look at the security of being on the list and who has to fight constituents, there's also the issue of being even listed as a candidate. It becomes a very serious game of politics, although elections naturally are. Now, some of the criticisms often levelled at a PR system can go a multitude of ways. One of the ones that you do tend to see is this idea that, it doesn't really form a strong government. But let's look at that. What does a strong government actually mean? Because it could mean a lot of things. We often assume it means the government is strong in the sense that it can do what it needs to. But does that mean it's not needing scrutiny? Because one thing that's very important to remember with a government is that it needs to be held accountable. If the government is not held accountable at any point, then it's no longer a strong government, but a dictatorship, even if it's not one singular individual, i.e. Brazil during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where it becomes more of a junta. This system means that there is an idea of democracy, but there isn't one actually in action. Furthermore, when we look at the idea of these elections happening, we want there to be a government formed, but we also want the opposition, which is representative of the populace, is representative of the electorate, to still be active, to still be holding up this whole parliament, because it isn't just about those who introduce laws, but also about those who scrutinize it. Now, going back to some of the other systems that we have, there are ones like the party list system. I slightly alluded to this in the AMS system, which is a system that you will find in places like Belgium and Luxembourg, generally the Benelux region, and Switzerland. Small states that have very strong, unique identities in their cantons or areas or constituents. So there could be, for example, let's say Belgium, there's a Flemish culture, there's a German culture, there's a French culture. It depends on which way you look at it. So similar with Switzerland as well. Now, you don't vote for a candidate, but rather you vote for a party. This system, in of itself, then allocates the seats accordingly in direct proportion of the amount of votes gained. What's the benefit of this system? Well, first and foremost, you don't really get too caught up in individual politics. You just look at the parties and you go, I like that party, we'll vote for that party and see what comes of it. It promotes you to be more identifying with the idea of nationhood. Generally, you are more focused on your region, where you're looking at the overall. When it becomes about the idea of purely focusing on your constituency, you tend to end up having a divided culture in these very tight spaces. These issues, especially in the countries that I mentioned, are historical problems. Switzerland in particular is not Switzerland as a country, but it is the Swiss Confederation, and there is a reason for that. Swiss culture is wildly different in terms of the people in places like Geneva to Zurich. You have to respect that this system does work in places like this because of the culture that is there with the people. The other thing that can be really good with this system, I find, is that it does allow for more representation of minorities. That can range from women to other ethnic groups to different races. This system sort of prevents people from choosing people just because they look like them, which is something you will notice with voting behavior. We tend to think of the US president's election, the presidential election in the USA, as a good example of where people get really caught up in the idea of who could you imagine having a beer with? A ridiculous notion, but it does again touch upon what goes through the mind of the electorate. However, the problems with this system is that you can get a number of small parties getting seats. This can really lead to unstable governments. You don't have to actually look far back in time, and to use one of the examples of this is Belgium. Back in 2010 and 2011, there was a crisis where it stemmed originally from 2007 with the Flemish community having an issue with their electoral district. Eventually, the country went through 541 days of being unable to form a government. The elections in 2010 that happened were so far gone that you could argue that the entire election process was more, at this point, ceremonial to get a government into power. Then you can look at the 2019 to 2020 election, which resulted in 652 days without a federal government, because there was a collapse in December of 2018 of that government, or the previous government. And this actually resulted in the COVID pandemic arriving, and there was still no government formed. Obviously, if you lived in any country around the world that did suffer with COVID, almost every single one, you will know that having no government, whilst you may say ironically, well, that probably would have made no difference, in actuality, this is a serious issue, that a country has no government and there's no one leading the agenda for combating a pandemic. However, they did manage to form a government shortly after the pandemic came in, because they had to form an interim one rather than have this vacuum up top. And then more recently, in June of 2024, there was another one when Bart de Wever, I believe, he was sworn in only in 2025. This was after 7 months of negotiating with parties to form a coalition. The problems, again, go to this issue that there is a Dutch-speaking Flemish community and a French-speaking community, and they do not get along too well. And as a result of this, and they have such different ideologies, the system falls apart very quickly. Therefore, you could argue that whilst it is in the interest of the country, because it does truly give representation, 652 days without a government is far too long. And this isn't about the idea of what I said before about a strong government. This is just going to the idea of you can't even form a government. Maybe an alternative system needs to be figured out for the entire region of Belgium, because there can't be a period of a couple of years without government. The next system I'm going to talk about is single transferable vote, or STV. An STV system, used a lot in both Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, is a system in which you return members for the constituency, but it could be as many as 5 people that represent the single constituency. These are people that a party might have put forward 25 individuals to say, here is a range of options within us, and let's fill up the seats as much as possible. So sometimes you might get a very exhaustive list of individuals on the ballot paper. However, one of the key components of this system is very good at providing a very close to representative of the votes to proportional representation of seats. So you do get a good ratio. You get the number that you ask for, usually within a few percentages out. Maybe there might be the odd case where you get maybe 23% of the seats rather than 25% of the vote that you had. So, okay, yeah, sure. There are times where it maybe isn't perfect, but it does usually yield a reasonable result. Another good thing is, because there's so many candidates within a single party, you will be compared to your compatriots, people who are also of the same ilk and mind as you, because there will be nuances and differences. This can result in individuals falling out very quickly or really far down on the likelihood of getting a seat, because whilst they are representing a party, they might have some very wayward or questionable views on certain things. It's important. A candidate is well versed in a number of situations and also aware of what the constituency really wants represented. You're not just fighting against other parties here, you are fighting against other individuals who have the same mind as you. Now, one of the things that you could point to with this system, though, is that whilst it does yield good proportional representation, it's largely again stuck on the party system. People vote for parties. This can be a bit of a problem when it comes to people going to election day and just choosing a party because that's the party, and people not really caring too much about the candidates. You're hoping that the system promotes it, but if it does, it actually, sometimes people will be just damned to just vote for a party because that's what they want to do. There is also the idea of the competition within the party. The infighting can become a bit too much and overall detrimental to the party and spread beyond a single constituency. For example, if you are somewhere like County Mayo and you start arguing and it becomes very public and ends up on national television, it could affect the entire party up and down the country because 2 candidates have a disagreement. So these are some of the things that we do see with proportional representation. And at this point here, I'd like to just sort of say that there isn't really a benefit to proportional representation over majoritarian or vice versa, which means one system is out and out better. My own thoughts on this are simple. No country is the same. No system is the same. No people are the same. People in themselves could be seen as, creatures of habit, but moreover, I don't really think that a single system can yield a result that you may look at and go, yes, this is going to be one size fits all and works. Geography, land, language, history, the history of which could be also something that maybe from a previous time where it was not so good. Maybe democracy wasn't a thing. The other thing as well is simplicity may be most important, and whatever the simplicity is defined as for the electorate could be a wide variety of things. So when people say about elections and they say about, who to vote for and what system works best and we need this system, we need that system, know that there is no true answer to this. Rather, the idea of having an election, having something, and being aware of an election's failings, be it as minor as a party list to As insane as having an electoral college, you know what the system is, and as long as it's maintained, that is the most crucial thing, that you all are in agreement to it. If the populace is not, then that's obviously for debate, and a system needs to be offered in response to that. The problems that we've seen in recent years with elections come now away from the idea of what an election is in of itself. We're starting to argue about the era of technology and interference with elections. Some, like Brazil, use a computerized system which is internally locked in. It's not easy to get into. You can't just rig this election. However, some people say about the pencil and paper. You can't cheat because it's pencil and paper. Sure, until you mark the paper a certain way and you're asked to go into a separate room. Obviously, this is me being a bit facetious, but I am actually being honest as well. There isn't a way to ensure that an election is 100% not rigged. However, most modern elections are very hard to rig, but we still scrutinize them, and we should still respect the results. No matter what they yield, we should always respect them, especially the candidates. No legitimate government can stand if they have, at some point, questioned the result. If an individual has come out and openly and brazenly attacked the system in which there have been no findings of corruption, there have been, in terms of the election itself, that individual has resigned themselves from the idea of the state. If you will, a Hobbes society, like he remarks upon in Leviathan, that you are part of this through your social contract. You relinquish some of your individual liberties, and in doing so, you partake in society. Others maybe wish to be more aligned with John Locke and say, hey, it doesn't matter. I want my individual liberty, and that's the most important thing. But in neither case did they say that there should be no ramifications for attacking the system, especially one in which there has been proven time and time again does work and is fair and just on the most part, because the people agree. But here we are. And that's a conversation for another day and another time. I just want to say thank you for joining me today, and I hope you have a lovely, lovely, lovely time doing whatever you're doing. Until next time.